first explain the purpose of your visit to Korea this time?
So I'm here in Korea to exchange views with Korean officials and Korean experts about the trajectory of the nuclear negotiations with Iran. Unfortunately, Korea, as you know, has been stuck between a rock and a hard place in the sense that because it is the custodian of one of the biggest funds of Iran's frozen assets outside of Iran, there's a lot of pressure on Korea from the Iranian side to release these assets. But because the negotiations remain in limbo and because of Korea's alliance with the United States and US sanctions, Korean banks are reluctant to transfer this money to the Iranians. So it's a very difficult situation.
About that article, to what extent do you rate the risk of on threat in this article really happened?
Kayhan is not an ordinary newspaper, and the author of the article, Hossein Shariat Madari, who's the editor-in-chief of that newspaper, is not an ordinary author. He is appointed to that position by Iran's supreme leader and almost serves as a mouthpiece of the inner circle of power in Iran. So usually when he puts out threats, these are not empty threats. And this is a reflection of the fact that Iranian officialdom is getting increasingly frustrated with the economic situation in Iran. And the more it becomes clear that the nuclear deal could not be restored, that the nuclear negotiations would not succeed, which means that Iran would not have access to sanctions relief, I think the more they would try to at least get the assets that they have here. And so that's why they have now resorted to these kind of threats. And potentially even the kind of pressure tactics that we have seen Iran use in the past, which is to take hostages or to attack embassies. So I'm afraid if the Iran nuclear deal falls apart or the negotiations between Iran and the United States do not succeed, this issue is going to become much more tense and tensions between Tehran and Seoul are going to escalate.
Then when is the deadline of this threat really actually happen?
So we face the risk of a military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities by this summer. Even if that doesn't happen, Iran right now has an agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency to resolve some of its outstanding problems with the IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, by June. If the nuclear talks do not succeed, Iran's issues with IAEA are also unlikely to be resolved. I'm afraid the Iranians would want to test the new government. And so it is quite possible that these two lines will cross one another around the same time. So I'm afraid by the end of May or in June, we might see an escalation of tensions, not just between Iran and the West, but also between Iran and South Korea.
What would you suggest our government to do right now?
I think it requires South Korean leaders, especially the incoming government, to clearly communicate to the Biden administration that it is in a very difficult situation and as allies, the United States should take the interests of Korea into account and help bring this very difficult and tenuous, dangerous situation to an end. I'm sure there are a lot of important items on the agenda when President Biden is here. The question of North Korea, of course, looms large. The war in Ukraine, the global energy crisis. There are lots of issues right now, from China to climate change, that the two leaders would have to discuss. However, this issue of Iran can potentially create an additional headache for the new government, which could be easily avoidable. And so if I were in their shoes, I would deal with this issue as a matter of priority and would definitely bring it up with President Biden as an urgent issue when he is here in Seoul.